So before day 14, before ovulation, we have the pre-ovulatory phase, which we call it the follicular phase, and this is due to the development of the follicles. So follicles start to develop to become secondary, tertiary, and the Graafian follicle, which is the follicle ready to rupture at day 14. So the Graafian follicle is the mature follicle. It is the follicle with the biggest diameter. It is the follicle with the biggest cavity, which will give pressure once it ruptures for the egg cell to be liberated and released into the fallopian tube. So this is the ovulation. Right after the ovulation, the remaining cells of the follicle become the corpus luteum, and this is why we call this stage, or the post-ovulatory phase, we call it as the luteal phase, due to the development of this corpus luteum. And this corpus luteum will start regressing, degenerating, until it becomes the corpus albicans, which will totally degenerate and die after, and this is only if fertilization doesn't take place. While if fertilization occurs, the corpus luteum will remain alive for 3 months until the placenta is formed, and then it's gonna degenerate. What we're seeing now is the uterine cycle, so the changes that take place at the level of the uterus. So the uterine cycle passes through main stages, which are the menstrual phase. It is the phase of bleeding, where the uterine lining sheds off, and this is gonna cause the bleeding. Then we have the secretory phase, which is in the follicular phase, and this is where the endometrial lining starts to thicken. After the ovulation, in the luteal phase, which we also call it the secretory phase, I mean here the follicular phase is the proliferation phase, sorry. And the luteal phase is the secretory phase, where the endometrium is very well developed, the glands are very well developed, and they are known as the uterine lace. So all of the changes that we're discussing take place at the level of the endometrium. So the first stage is the menses. We notice, take a look here, because the endometrial lining is being shed off, it's being slowed off, it's being removed, so we can notice a decrease in the endometrial lining, and this marks the menstrual phase. Let us take a look into the next slide because it's clearer. So this is the menstruation. We notice that during menstruation or bleeding, which comes in the first 5 days of the cycle, in the uterine cycle, the endometrial lining sheds off. The blood vessels beneath are now exposed. This is what's gonna cause the bleeding. After that comes the proliferation phase, which is the multiplication phase. Take a look into the endometrial lining. It starts to increase, it starts to develop, it starts to thicken. Because it's thickening, we call this phase proliferation phase. Okay, all of this is taking place before day 14, before the ovulatory phase. So if you take a look into what's happening here, okay, so this increase here corresponds to the thickening of the endometrial lining. What's developing here is the endometrial glands. Okay, so the endometrial glands are developing, they started to develop, and also the blood vessels, which are gonna have a spiral shape, they start to become rich in this uterine place. Now, after ovulation, the uterine cycle will become in its secretory phase. So the uterine lining completes its development until it reaches the thickness needed for the implantation. So now the thickness is reached, the needed thickness is reached, so that if fertilization has taken place, the implantation process will take place normally. And if you take a look into the glands, you will notice that they are very well developed. This is why we call them the uterine lace. And the spiral arterioles are very well developed now, and the blood vessels are richly supplied. So the uterus is now ready to receive the fertilized egg in case fertilization has taken place. We also said that there are changes at the level of the body temperature throughout the sexual cycle of the female. So if you take a look, in the follicular phase, Usually the body temperature usually this body temperature is at the low stage. So usually it ranges, the body temperature before the day 14, before ovulation, is usually around 36.8 till 36.9 or 37 degrees Celsius. Right after ovulation, the body temperature increases until 37.1, 37.2 approximately, and it stabilizes somehow, it fluctuates around these values that are 37.1 or 37.2. This is what we call it a thermal plateau. So because it has increased and maintained this increase throughout the luteal phase, so a lady can simply check her body temperature. If it was less than 37, she can directly know that she's in her follicular phase, pre-ovulatory phase. While if her body temperature is around 37.2 or something close to that, she will know that she's after the ovulation, in her post-ovulatory phase or in her luteal phase. After the end of the first sexual cycle, you will notice that this body temperature decreases until it reaches the level where it starts, and a new sexual cycle will start all over again. This is a very important slide. We're not gonna cover it all today. We're gonna cover this part of it along with this part of it. This is the part that we have been discussing. So we are supposed to know that the ovarian cycle and uterine cycle are synchronous. So they work in a parallel manner. What does that mean? Take a look. In the pre-ovulatory phase, while the follicles were developing at the level of the uterus until it becomes the Graafian follicle, at the level of the uterine cycle, there was the menses at first 5 days, and then the proliferation phase or the thickening of the endometrial lining in the rest of this follicular phase. Okay? Just after the Graafian follicle ruptures, and this day marks the day of ovulation, the follicular cells change into the corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum, if no fertilization has taken place, will start regressing until it becomes the corpus albicans. Meanwhile, at the level of the endometrium lining completes development. So this is known as the secretory phase until it reaches the needed thickness. So in case fertilization has taken place, now the uterus is ready to receive the fertilized zygote, and the uterine lace has developed. So remember, always remember that uterine lace corresponds to the very well developed glands at the level of the uterus. So take a look how they are synchronized with each other. When the corpus albicans is formed, which is the regression of the corpus luteum, this marks the end. So it marks the end of the cycle. Back to the slide. It marks the end of the cycle. So here, the corpus albicans degenerated. At the same time, happened to the endometrial lining. It sheds off. So menses starts again. So this marks the end of the cycle at the level of the ovaries and at the level of the uterus, and the beginning of a new cycle. Thank you.